Good morning. The time is now 10 o'clock and it's time for me to open this hearing. Firstly, can I just check the technology that everybody can hear and see okay? The programme officer has already signed participants in, but can I just check who's here today for this first session? I believe we have Mr. Jameson, the council solicitor. If you can remember just to unmute and then I can hear you when you speak.
Sorry, Mum. Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much.
Good. Yes, I'm here.
Good. I believe we also have Mr. Ian Smith.
Yes, Mum, I'm here. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, lovely. Thank you. And Mr. Begley, Terry Begley.
Yes, Mum. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Thank you. That all seems in order. So my name is Helen Harkenhull and I am a Chartered Town Planner and I'm the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to hold this examination into the legal compliance and soundness of the Corby Part 2 Local Plan 2011 to 2031. The hearing sessions that are taking place today and for the next 2 days are all parts of this examination. Firstly, can I introduce the Programme Officer, Mr. Ian Kemp, which I'm sure many of you have already had contact with him. He's working under my direction and is independent of the council.
Good morning,
So
everyone.
if you have any queries, good morning, Ian. If you have any queries about the examination, then please contact him directly. Now, a little about the examination itself. The plan under examination is the publication draft submission version of the Part 2 Local Plan for Corby, 2011 to 2031. The examination is looking into the legal compliance and soundness of the submitted plan, not whether it can in some way be made better, but whether it is or can be made sound. Now, paragraph 35 of the 2019 National Planning Policy Framework sets out the test of soundness. The plan must be positively prepared, which is concerned with meeting objectively assessed needs and unmet needs from neighbouring areas, to be justified, which means it must be an appropriate evidence-based strategy, taking into account all reasonable alternatives, that it is effective, which means it must be deliverable over the planned period, and consistent with national policy. So in other words, it must be in accordance with the policies in the National Planning Policy Framework. Now, in submitting the plan, the council consider that it is sound, and that's the starting point for the examination. So if anyone is challenging the soundness of the plan, then they must explain why and what changes would make the plan sound. Now, the examination isn't just about the hearings. It includes consideration of a wide range of written documents and representations. I have read all the relevant documents, representations, responses, and the hearing statements. I should like to thank the council and all the participants for the evidence that has been submitted for my consideration. And I want to say a little bit about the organisation of this virtual hearing, including some procedural matters and timetabling. Now, these virtual hearings will run in a very similar way to physical hearings, but there will be some necessary adjustments which I shall outline. The hearings will take the form of a structured discussion based on the matters, issues and questions that have already been prepared and published on the council's webpage. I will lead the hearing and ask the questions and invite people one at a time to contribute to the discussion. The responses should be directed to me. The purpose clearly is for me to gain all the information I need to come to my final report. You should not attempt to speak unless invited to do so. And if you wish to speak on a particular matter, please use the hand facility on the toolbar. And then that will notify me that you wish to speak, and I'll invite you into the discussion at an appropriate time. It's not appropriate to hand in material at a virtual hearing. That should already have been sent to the programme officer for prior distribution. So all the material that we're going to refer to or discuss today and during the examination should already be on the examination website. Any new material submitted after this event should only be following a specific request from myself, unless there are exceptional reasons. There's to be no screen sharing, and please do not hold documents up to the camera. During the event, unless you are speaking, it's very helpful if everyone can please turn off their microphones to minimise any unwanted background noises. Please also make sure that your telephones are switched off or silenced if your microphone is likely to be switched on during the part of the hearing. If you become disconnected from the event for some reason or on a future event, then find you can't connect, please contact the programme officer immediately by email or telephone, and he will do his best to assist you wherever he can. Now, I've read and will take account of the hearing statements and all the original representations. There's no need to repeat those specifically. My aim is to move the discussion on from those documents and deal with specific questions that I have or areas that need clarification or further explanation. Can you make your contributions brief and focused, and don't repeat points that have already been made by other participants? When you finish speaking, please remember to turn your microphone off and lower your hand. For the benefit of third parties who may be watching this event, when you refer to documents, can you please refer to them using their full titles, an examination reference if you have that, rather than by some abbreviation or other form of acronym. Now, this hearing will be live streamed via the internet, and a copy of the recording kept on the Council's website. If anyone doesn't wish to be seen on the recording, then they should already have notified the programme officer. If for whatever reason you haven't done that, please notify me when you speak and just don't turn the camera on. At the end of the hearing, I will end the session and ask all participants to log out. Please can you ensure you attend the whole session which you are attending from start to finish, and avoid leaving the screen except during the breaks. We'll have a refreshment break today around 11 o'clock and an hour's lunch break between 1 and 2. And then this afternoon, we also intend to have a further break around 3:30. The hearing will close before 5 o'clock, or very likely to be before that. Now, turning to the main modifications. In due course, I will prepare a list of proposed main modifications that I consider are required to make the plan sound. The Council have already published a schedule of proposed changes to the plan, and that was prepared in the updated response to my initial questions, that's exam 1A. This is in effect a living document on the website. It's likely to be added to during the hearings. All participants need to be aware of what's in that document, as where appropriate, there may be discussion about those proposed changes during the hearings. Can I ask the Council to keep a record of any modifications or other areas of further work that are discussed during the hearings? And then let me have a typed up schedule of those by the programme officer after the event. That just provides a checklist for everybody, so we're sure of what we need to do. Any proposed main modifications will require consultation and may require further sustainability appraisal. Now, the examination remains open until my report is submitted to the Council. No further representations or evidence will be accepted after the hearing sessions have finished, unless I specifically request them. So, are there any questions from anybody about how the hearings will operate? No, we have some shake of heads, so that's good. Thank you very much. So that concludes my opening remarks today. Can I now invite Mr. Smith, who is the Head of Planning and Environmental Services and Interim Head of Housing, who is going to give a short opening statement on behalf of the Council.
Thank you. Welcome, Madam Inspector and observers online. I'd like to thank the Programme Officer and Democratic Services for management of the process leading up today and over the next few days. Corby Borough Council is pleased to have submitted its Part 2 local plan for examination. We hope the opportunity to discuss matters raised by the Inspector to our emerging local plan is both helpful and constructive. Members of the Council's local plan team will be participating in the hearing sessions over the course of the week. They will be joined through the proceedings by Mr. Rob Jameson, a specialist town and country planning solicitor with particular experience in local plan examinations for local planning authorities. The submitted plan is a product of many years of diligent work by both officers and members of Corby Borough Council and has evolved iteratively to reflect public consultation and sustainability appraisal process. The Part 2 local plan follows on from and supports the Part 1 North Northamptonshire Joint Core Strategy that prescribes the key strategic decisions about overall strategy and levels of development. It seeks to complement that plan, not to duplicate or review any part of it. The adoption of the Part 2 local plan will be followed closely by an update of the Joint Core Strategy, to be known as the North Northamptonshire Strategy Plan, by the North Northamptonshire Unitary Authority formed in April 2021. The plan will form part of a suite of planning policy documents that includes a number of supplementary planning documents and potentially neighbourhood plans. The plan has been prepared in the context of ongoing urban regeneration and growth that has transformed the borough since the turn of the century. The transformational change that reflects the council's ambitious programme of regeneration and growth, working towards doubling the population with a complementary increase in jobs, prosperity and the quality of local public services, has been facilitated by the positive strategic policies set out in Part 1 North Northamptonshire Joint Core Strategy. In recent years, the borough has consistently been one of the fastest growing council areas in England, which is a clear statement of the positive benefits of having an adopted local plan. The Part 2 local plan will reinforce the strategic policies in the Part 1 North Northamptonshire Joint Core Strategy to provide a comprehensive planning framework that continues to support the transformation of the borough by allocating additional sites to meet housing and employment needs, improving and promoting a network of local centres, setting out additional, more detailed policy requirements to guide development management decisions, and reviewing the saved policies of the 1997 Corby Borough Local Plan. Particular attention is given to the accommodation needs of an ageing population, including those with special care requirements and people with disabilities, and the needs of others with self-build aspirations. With the proposed changes outlined to the Expector in February 2020, Exam 1A, the Council considers that it has a sound and positive plan which will contribute positively to the vision, strategy and strategic policies of the Joint Core Strategy, and will also support and complement the Council's existing corporate strategies. It is hoped, given that the plan will be found sound. Where it is concluded that there are modifications necessary to achieve this conclusion, these will, as previously indicated, be accepted and incorporated by Corby Borough Council. Thank you for your attention. That concludes the opening statement on behalf of Corby Borough Council.
Right, thank you very much, Mr. Smith. Can I ask that that statement is put onto the examination webpage as an examination document, please? Just pass that through to the programme officer to do. Okay, thank you very much. So today's session, matter one, that looks at legal compliance and the duty to cooperate. I first of all like to invite the council, Mr. Begley I think is going to deal with this one, to look at what strategic cross-boundary matters have arisen during the preparation of the plan and the cooperation that's taken place to resolve those.
Thank you, ma'am. This is a Part 2 local plan, and it does not address strategic matters which are resolved through the Part 1 Joint Core Strategy. The written statement sets out some of the well-established joint planning arrangements that have resolved this, and they include joint working on technical studies and well-established joint planning arrangements that facilitated constructive and proactive relationship with partners and duty to cooperate authorities.
Right, okay, thank you, Mr. Begley. Yes, I understand that if this is a Part 2 plan and therefore is in conformity and alignment with the Joint Core Strategy, and a lot of elements of cross-boundary issues have been addressed through the work on the joint core strategy. For my benefit and background, can you just explain to me what those joint areas, cross-boundary issues are that have been addressed through the ongoing work between the authorities?
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Thanks for clarifying that. The joint core strategy presents the sort of overall picture for North Northamptonshire, and it deals with housing distribution, housing numbers, jobs provision, job distribution across North Northamptonshire, green infrastructure, links. It has a infrastructure priority across North Northamptonshire.
If it's helpful, if I ask the question that in terms of those cross-boundary matters, are there any particular things, say infrastructure matters, that have had to be addressed between the authorities, and does that need to be taken account of in the Part 2 plan?
There's no outstanding matters that need to be taken account of in the Part 2 local plan. Any of the North Northamptonshire priorities that we need are included in the joint core strategy.
Yes, I'm aware of that, but what are those cross-boundary matters in terms of infrastructure? Are there particular highway works that need to be there's had to be a certain amount of joint working to achieve? What cross-boundary work has taken place between the authorities?
In terms of infrastructure and cross-boundary work, we've got a North Northamptonshire infrastructure delivery plan that was prepared was coordinated by a joint planning unit in partnership with delivery partners. We also have the North Northamptonshire investment framework, which complements and updates that North Northamptonshire infrastructure delivery plan. Within that, it includes a number of infrastructure that is relevant to Corby, and that includes the Corby Northern Orbital Road. It includes highway and infrastructure improvements. And overall, it concludes that there's no insurmountable infrastructure that should prevent the growth accommodated in the joint core strategy within Corby.
Okay, thank you for that response. Is there anything within the Part 2 local plan that has resulted from that joint working? In other words, what's the outcomes been on particular matters that have affected and formulated the Part 2 plan?
The distribution of housing has implications for Part 2 local plan. The housing numbers, so any of the requirements that have sort of stemmed from that have been accommodated within the Part 2 local plan.
I'm thinking maybe the green infrastructure strategy and whether or not joint working has resulted in certain changes to policies within the plan. Possibly, for example, a Gypsies and Traveller approach, has that culminated from joint working and discussions with other authorities?
Sorry, ma'am. At the start, you was muted. I didn't hear the start of your question.
Sorry. Sorry. Basically, what I'm looking at is what discussions have taken place with other authorities and how that has impacted on the policies within the plan. So I was referencing their possibility of green infrastructure or the approach to Gypsy and Travellers. So how has that joint working, how has that affected the formulation of policies within the plan?
A lot of the joint working has affected the formulation of policies within the joint core strategy. There was joint work on a number of technical studies that covered retail, housing, employment, transport, population, flood risk, gypsy and travellers, and then as a result, that's framed what we've had to do in the Part 2 local plan.
Okay, that's fine. Can I just have a look at your statement, your Matter 1 statement, paragraph 2.3, and in that you'll say that cross-boundary discussions took place at a local scale. Details of those are provided in the revised statement of compliance with the duty to cooperate. Can you just explain a little bit more for me what you were referring to there? What took place at a local scale?
An example of a local scale discussions that took place was around green infrastructure, consultation with East Northamptonshire Council and joining up the links of their evolving work in terms of their green infrastructure corridors.
Okay, thank you. Any other work that you would refer to in this regard?
There was joint technical work in terms of gypsy and traveller. That evidence emerged during the preparation of the plan. That was done on a joint basis.
Yeah, that's the GTAA, updated 2019 GTAA, yeah. Okay, thank you. And that's probably all I need to explore in terms of the duty to cooperate itself, unless there's any further comments you want to put forward this morning.
No, largely the joint core strategy really set a clear guidelines for our Part 2 local plan.
Yes, I'm aware of that. Yeah.
As a result, through the consultations, we didn't get much duty to cooperate issues come up really.
Yes, I'm aware of that. There are very few representations on this particular issue. Yeah, no, that's fine. That's great. Thank you very much. Can we move on then to other areas of legal compliance that are required to be met? Statement of community involvement. I note that current version is dated January 2014. Now, I'm sure you're aware that the government's written ministerial statement on virtual working and planning in response to the COVID-19 restrictions has suggested that authorities provide an update and review their statements of community involvement, particularly with the current challenges and restrictions that face us. Have the council done that, or do you intend to do that?
Yes, there is an updated version, a 2019 version.
Is that an examination document?
I thought it was.
I could be wrong, yeah. I think it's only the 2014 one that's referred to in your matter statement. Can I leave you to come back to me on that point if it's easier than...
I found it.
Oh, right, okay.
It's reference PMS-S2A, and it was July 2019.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Inspector, ma'am. Our response to question 1B does refer to Regulation 19 being undertaken in accordance with the 2019 SCA.
Oh, right. Okay, that's fine. Thank you for that update. That's fine. I think that's all we need to ask on that then. In terms of consultation and how the plan has progressed, perhaps you could outline for me the types of consultation that have taken place and how that has met the statement of community involvement.
We've provided quite a detailed response to the consultations that have taken place. I'll pick out some bits from the...
Yeah, that's fine. Just a summary be acceptable. Thank you.
So we made hard copies available at a number of public inspection points. we had engaged with local groups, including the parish council and town councils.
And how successful was that consultation exercise?
How, sorry?
How successful was that consultation exercise in terms of the responses and trying to reach hard to reach groups, for example, to ensure that everybody had the opportunity to engage in the process?
I think it varied, Mum. It varied across the borough. And at different stages during the process, it would vary as well.
Can you expand on that, please?
Some of the village drop-in events were very popular, particularly where there was perhaps a live planning application ongoing. We had a well-attended event at Gretton, and that was because perhaps a live planning application, and they'd started the neighbourhood planning process. And I think that ensured that it generated a lot of interest in the community. So it was well attended.
Okay, thank you. Were there any particular elements of the population that you find were underrepresented or were more difficult to reach?
None specific elements stand out as being particularly difficult to reach.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you for that. In terms of other elements of legal compliance, I made reference to the local development scheme, and I note that a revised LDS has been prepared, which takes account of the proposal for a DPD for Gypsy and Travellers, but we'll come on to that in other sessions in more detail. In terms of the sustainability appraisal, and whether that has been based on a sound process, perhaps you could just briefly outline for me how that has been undertaken, the reasonable alternatives that have been considered, and whether you feel that that was appropriate in formulating the plan.
Thank you, Mum. The SA process has been integral throughout the process. We've had ACOM leading on that, who done the SA for the Joint Core Strategy. In terms of the approach they took, they tested the reasonable alternatives for the amount of housing in employment land, housing in the rural area, and site options. The thematic planning policies such as design and environmental protection were prepared on a basis for a robust evidence base, and therefore the assessment of reasonable alternatives was not part of the SA process. It's been very clear in the SA the scope of the Part 2 local plan, i.e. that it can't alter the Joint Core Strategy approach. And I think it's providing an appropriate and robust approach.
Right, okay. One thing I want to explore in a little bit more detail is housing in rural areas. There have been some representations from various parties about that, in particular their view that there needs to be more housing in rural areas. And I'm just interested to explore a little more on whether or not that was tested in any way through the SA process.
The SA does consider housing numbers. We've got paragraph 5.9 to 5.25 of the SA, which sets out consideration of the reasonable alternatives. And it notes that the Part 2 local plan is unable to alter the JCS strategy at paragraph 5.10, and no specific requirements have been identified for further housing growth in the rural area, and that additional growth could be accommodated through the existing policy framework, which should be evidenced through a neighbourhood plan or housing needs survey, and that's set out in paragraph 5.24 of the SA.
Right, okay. Can I explore a little bit about, I know from the joint core strategy that there is a comment within there, I think it's policy 11 within there, that suggests that Part 2 local plans and also neighbourhood plans may test higher levels of growth to address local needs and opportunities, in particular in rural areas. Now, I note that as an alternative, the SA considers that further growth in rural areas is not a suitable alternative, it's not a reasonable alternative to take forward. Can you just discuss that a little bit more for me? The conclusions and the approach that you took in terms of viewing that as being an unreasonable alternative. What was your thinking behind that? Why was that approach taken?
That approach really, the context of our housing land supply in the rural area at the moment, we've already overprovided in terms of the JCS requirements. And this plan is proposing to meet an oversupply against the JCS requirements. However, that's directed towards the urban area. So I think in that context, it wasn't reasonable to direct any more growth to the rural area other than what's going to come forward through other than what's going to come through windfalls and neighbourhood plans potentially.
Right, okay, yeah, I understand that. And the SA report does look at unreasonable alternatives, basically two to look at there. Only plan to meet needs set out in the joint core strategy, and then increase growth in the rural areas instead of Corby. What the SA didn't look at was increased growth in the rural areas as well as some growth within Corby. There could be an argument that that was a reasonable alternative. And I'd be interested in your view on that.
My view is that we've already oversupplied in terms of rural area, and I know there's provision to put more in the rural area, but the joint core strategy, the SA of the joint core strategies already looked at what a dispersal of rural growth in the rural area would mean, and found that not to be sustainable. Any more growth in the rural area, it'd be against what has already been assessed through the joint core strategy.
It would to a degree, but the core strategy does allow for further growth within rural areas. In particular, it suggests that maybe through neighbourhood plans, for example, there may be an opportunity for further growth. And it does suggest, I think, the core strategy that there may be an opportunity to test that as a possible alternative. I'm just interested to explore the council's view on whether that was a reasonable alternative and whether or not that is something that could have been assessed throughout the SA. And the reason for asking this is really because of the representations from a number of parties who are suggesting that increased growth in the rural areas should have been looked at in more depth, recognising that you have met the number of dwellings in the rural areas in terms of the spatial distribution of new properties in the borough. Even having that in regard, it's really just trying to explore the philosophy and the thinking that the council were bringing forward at this time, which then obviously culminated in the policies in the plan and the sites that have been allocated. So I'm just really interested to learn to what extent you feel there is opportunity for further growth in the rural areas and whether or not that should have been assessed in more detail in the SA.
There is potential for further growth in the rural area. Since the start of the plan period, we've delivered above the housing requirements, which demonstrates that the current existing policy framework does provide for that growth. In the initial plan period of the joint core strategy, we've had no neighbourhood plans, but there's now 5 of them emerging, so there's potential for further growth in the rural area. And it's recognised that the joint core strategy option to be tested, but that option would only be tested if we hadn't already oversupplied in the rural area. So really that rules out that option, because the SA is very clear that Part 2 can't alter the strategy of the joint core strategy, and with the housing numbers we've already had and potential to come forward over the rest of the plan period, I feel by testing that option would be significantly altering the strategy, the joint core strategy. So it wasn't really a reasonable option to test.
Sorry, Mr. Begley, you're breaking up at my end, so I don't know whether other people are losing you as well. But I just lost you at the end of that comment, I'm afraid. Could you just repeat what you said there, please?
What part did you lose me?
It was just the end section, I think, that I missed, I'm afraid. If you just repeat that comment again, that probably will be helpful.
Well, just because of the numbers we've delivered, it's recognised that the joint core strategy does allow us to test the options, but because of the numbers we've delivered, testing that option would just alter the strategy completely. So it wasn't felt that it was a reasonable option to test.
Right, okay, I understand that. That's helpful, thank you. I think that it's explored that element. Can I just look a little bit now about the SA and mitigation? Clearly, one of the outputs, if you will, of the SA process is to look at whether there are any adverse impacts, whether there are any negative effects, and whether or not the plan needs to address those. So were any negative effects identified which fed into any further changes to policy or change the approach?
Can I just ask, it's Rob Jameson here, whether you've got my raised hand on your screen or not?
I do need to put the participants on. Do you wish to come in on a particular point? Yes, I do have it now. Do you want to come in on a particular point now, Mr. Jameson?
Thank you, ma'am. It was on the last question about policy 11 of the joint core strategy. And you'll be aware of this, of course, but the starting point of policy 11 for the rural areas is contained in paragraph 2A of policy 11. Development in the rural areas will be limited to that required to support a prosperous rural economy or to meet a locally arising need, which cannot be met more sustainably at a nearby larger settlement. And I think it's that last comment which is pertinent. Of course, B does go on to say that local plans, neighbourhood plans may identify sites to meet locally identified needs, but that would be purely where those locally identified needs couldn't be met elsewhere. But I think the driving force has been 2A, which says that development's going to be limited to that required to support prosperous local economy, and which cannot be met locally arisingly, which cannot be met more sustainably at a nearby larger settlement. So again, the test is, can the development actually be met in a more sustainable and larger settlement? And I think that's led to the approach taken in the SA, ma'am. Thank you.
Right, no, that's helpful. Thank you, Mr. James. I'm sorry I didn't pick up on your hand up. I shall try and ensure that I did check that. Thank you. Right, okay, so if I move on back to Mr. Begley, the question which related to the SA and mitigation, and whether or not, clearly the SA looks at whether there are some negative effects of a particular approach, and the question really related to whether there were any negative impacts that then indicated a need to change the policy approach or change a particular policy. I'd be interested to hear your comments on that particular aspect, please.
Thank you. The interim SA made recommendations, a number of recommendations, to the site design principles. We made a number of them changes before the Regulation 19 document, and then yes, the final SA in conclusion said that all chapters of the Part 2 perform positively against the SA topics, and that there are no adverse effects identified which require significant mitigation.
Right, okay, thank you. So are there any particular policies that were altered or amended besides the design principles?
No, it was only the site design principles for allocated sites.
Yeah. Okay, all right, thank you. I think that's helpful, thank you. Turning just to other elements that we need to look at in terms of the legal compliance, habitat regulations assessment, that has been completed, and I have seen that English Nature Natural England have come back and confirmed that they have no concerns with that piece of work that's been undertaken. So I have no concerns in terms of the legal compliance of the Habitat regulations in this case. In terms of the Equality Act 2010, perhaps you could outline for me how the council have approached the formulation of the plan to ensure that the Equality Act has been met and the relevant characteristics have been protected.
Thank you, ma'am. The council has a EIA tool that allows us to think carefully about the impacts of policy may have on different communities or groups and enable it to improve the policy environment for the Part 2 local plan. The equality questionnaire was submitted with our documents, and the results of that questionnaire indicate that a full stage 2 equality impact assessment was not required, as the policies in the Part 2 local plan were deemed not to have a negative impact on the equality target groups.
Right, okay, so you undertook a preliminary assessment of the document, which then indicated that there weren't any particular areas, and then that concluded that there was no need to do a further piece of work in terms of a full quality impact assessment of policies in particular.
That's right, ma'am. We worked with our equality and diversity officer to complete that questionnaire, and that's what it found. Right,
okay, that's lovely. Thank you very much. I think for this session, that's all I need to address. Can I just thank all participants for their assistance with matter 1. We will now take an adjournment. We are coming back at 11:30 to look at matter 2, which is securing infrastructure and services. Is there anything further from any party just before I adjourn? No, we're all happy. Excellent. In that case, then I will adjourn this particular session. And then, as I said, we will come back at 11:30 to look at matter 2. So thank you very much, everybody.